principals should ask their teachers, when you feel supported by me as a principal, what does that look like? Instead of assuming that. And I learned that from him. And so and that goes back to someone who cares for their teachers, but cares, like, don't wait for them to walk through the door. Walk through their door.
Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of collaboration and reflection as we seek to keep growing as teachers. So this podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello everyone, welcome to Hallway Conversations. My name's Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGroat.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
Richard Mao has a wonderful book titled The Life of the Mind. It's a short but important book, and I really encourage you to read it. Chapter 11 in that book is one I've read many times. It is titled Safe Spaces for Playing Around. And in that chapter, Mao says, quote, safe spaces are essential for intellectual explorations, end quote. And he shares a vignette of having a hallway conversation with a colleague that often concluded with the colleague stating, well, I have to go back to my office to play around with a few ideas. As we begin season 3, I think of the concept of playing around with a few ideas and how that captures what we're trying to do here. Our deep hope is to create a safe space for all of us, you and us, to learn together. And our desire is that we might be encouraged in our work and encourage you to go back to your classroom, your staff room, your boardroom, or your hallway and play around a bit. And while teaching and education is a serious business, Dave, Abby, and I try not to take ourselves too seriously here.
That's right.
Whether on the podcast or in the hallway, we like to poke fun and laugh, but we also try to carry each other's burdens and pray with each other once in a while. And we think this is what it means to live in Christian community. So if you are new to Hallway Conversations, welcome. The general format is that one of us brings a question and we play around in the sandbox with it. Better yet, we love getting questions from you, our listeners. So if you have time, we'd like to hear from you. So please email us or send us a recording of your question, and we'll do our best to play around with it. Please send your questions to hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com.
All right. So the last couple of weeks, we've been taking turns kind of telling our stories and sharing some of our passions. So 2 weeks ago, you all grilled me about educational technology. Last week it was Abby's turn. We talked about literacy. And Matt, this week we're going to talk with you about one of your areas of expertise and passion.
We're using the word expertise pretty loosely here.
You know.
Yeah.
So I've always appreciated the administrators that I've worked for because I realize I have actively avoided becoming an administrator.
Yeah.
I do not think I'm thick-skinned enough for that work.
Yeah.
But I know, Matt, you have an expertise. You've had history as a school leader, and I would just let's talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah.
Was school leadership always an interest for you? Or maybe just tell us the story. How'd you get into school leadership?
Well, let's just say if I was a better leader, I would have gone before Abby last week, because if you haven't listened to last week's podcast, you need to.
I think that's
that's leadership 101. Be strategic where you are.
Encouraging questions
from you is
why it was so good.
Right.
So,
Dave, it's interesting that you said, like, one of the things in your preamble about this idea of not being in leadership and not having thick skin. And it's funny you said that for me, because I would say in some ways that's been a bit of my struggle actually in school leadership is, it's hard. I take things, I'm a feeler. You guys know that about me. I feel things deeply, and there's wonderful, that's a wonderful gift from God. I'm grateful for that gift. I want to name that. But like with any gift, there's a shadow side to that, right? And so, whether you have thick skin or not, I hope doesn't stop people from entering leadership. But I understand what you mean. Like there's hard things like of leadership, you get to journey through hard things with people, and that's a privilege, like sacred moments, and you're on the receiving end of people's frustrations, and you learn to listen and take it and receive it. And I would lie. I just made a quick connection point. I know you asked a question about my journey into it, but it's not for the faint of heart. It's incredibly rewarding, and if you have thick skin, that's good. But if you don't, that shouldn't stop people, I guess. Sure. From getting into it. So I actually want to start with that. Yeah, my journey into leadership. That's a good question, Dave. I became a vice principal. So I shared the story last night. So I teach Education 560 at the university here, which is Introduction to School Leadership. So There's a few current leaders in there. Most of those tend to be fellow Canadians, so shout out to people north of the border.
Right.
But people who are thinking about, and we have people in public schools, we have people in Christian schools, non-faith-based private schools from Iowa, and actually from many states, and actually from around the world. But I was sharing last night, actually, as we were talking about leadership, my journey into leadership. And I was 28 when I became a vice principal back in British Columbia. And I realize now that I maybe realized then, but I really realize now how I was not ready for that. And I was reflecting on that actually as I was reading yesterday and sharing with the students in that class something from the educational task of Dordt University, which is, so Dordt has these two documents. One's called the educational task. Dordt is where we work if you're new, and that's with the T, just to clarify for people far away. Dordt University. But they have these two amazing documents. One's called the educational task and the educational framework. And whether you're associated with Dordt or not, I genuinely encourage you to read those. But in that document, it talks about the concept of office, which has become really powerful for me as I've just gotten older, to be honest, and understanding it more. But I just want to read something that I mentioned last night that's part of eventually answering your question. But it says, in any social context, certain individuals have a responsibility to care for the common good of the community. So in family life, parents have responsibility to nourish, educate, protect their children. In the ecclesial life, pastor, elders, and deacons are called to minister to their congregations in various ways, and we refer to those roles and responsibilities as offices. And when I read that, I was really, it struck me that when I first became an administrator, this idea that we have the responsibility to care for the common good of the community, I want to believe that I did that. Like I tend to be, and I say it humbly, like I care for others. I care deeply for others. But I don't think I fully understood this responsibility of caring for the common good of the larger community. And so when I got into leadership, I think it was, I thought there was, identified a potential need in the school. I was like, hey, I can do that. There was for sure a bit of arrogance attached to that, because who are you at 20? Like, there's 28-year-olds who are great principals. I'm saying from Matt Beavers at 28, who did I think I was that I could be a principal? This is an area of growth. Absolutely. And for whatever, I applied for that job. I was, and I became a vice principal, and I went into it really pretty blind and honestly not knowing what I was saying yes to. But I also then, when I read this document about office and what does it mean to have office consciousness, I also want to believe that I grew in my understanding of that, and I grew in that quite quickly, but I still continue to grow in that. I think we don't fully understand, because I think when you use the language of a responsibility to care for the common good of the community, that's a huge weight. And I loved being in school leadership, but it's also not to be taken lightly, especially in that context of responsibility to care for the community. And when you're in school leadership, that is your responsibility. To care for the community.
So to make an analogy, it sounds like you're describing kind of a shepherding sort of a role here, right? Like you are entrusted with care for students, teachers, facilities.
Absolutely. It's interesting because as I got further into my journey in leadership, someone said once, like part of the job of being a school leader is that, when you wake up at 3:30 in the morning, who's thinking about if the lights were turned off? Who's thinking, who's thinking about? You're the person who's thinking about it when no one else is thinking about it. That's part of your job, which literally can lead to sleepless nights. And so there's definitely an operational side to it, which I had to grow in my understanding of that. But there's also a shepherding side. And you can talk to 10 different leaders, and they're going to have, some are going to be like, no, like they're going to downplay the shepherding side, and there's nothing wrong with that part of it. Dave, you talk about you teach who you are, right? But Parker Palmer, but I think you lead who you are too, right? Yeah. And so I think that shepherding comes out of who I am. It was modeled to me by some really strong mentors. And I think that would be an appropriate analogy sort of for how I saw myself as a leader. And I think part of that, as you're shepherding, I had to learn to give up control at times, right? And as a shepherd, that's like you're trying to control everything. And
the sheep don't want to go where you
yeah, 100%.
I'm a sheep.
Yeah, totally. And those are hard moments, actually,
Yeah.
right? Because there's times there's good reason they don't want to go for you where you want to go, and you have to pay attention to that. But you have to pay attention to that. You have to, and that's what's the common good,
Right.
Yeah.
right? And to think that, Lee Haller was a wonderful a mentor for me many years ago. He's the former executive director of the Society of Christian Schools of British Columbia, one of the wisest people I met. But I remember one time talking to him about leadership, and he always talked about, like, beware the person who acts like they've got the corner on the truth, right? Like, just always, and I had, so in some ways I had to be careful not to be that person, because I can be.
Sure.
And so there's times as a leader, right, you also, you're shepherding and you're stewarding, but how do you also at times get out of your own way, actually, right? And so I had to learn that as well. So yeah, I appreciate that, as thinking about as a shepherd, and that fits, I think. Sorry,
Matt, I know that we talked about analogies a little bit, and when I heard you talking about how you grew into the role by being in the role, I think often we talk a lot in our department about classroom management, right? And how our students don't feel like we can talk about classroom management theory all we want. They write a position paper on classroom, but we can't teach them classroom management in the full way until they're in front of students managing a class, right? Do you feel that way about leadership a little bit too?
Absolutely. Yes. So much so, Abby. So as soon as you started asking the question, I just think about, the things I learned along the way. And you know what? I worked as a vice principal and a principal at a few different schools, and it's God's grace. Like, the people I worked with, like, they were of the highest quality and of the highest character. And I look back now and I think, man, they must have just rolled their eyes sometimes, and yet they were so gracious and so kind. But yeah, you have to learn by doing. And I think one of the things that I learned is try to be better at asking questions. I love asking questions and getting to, but I had to learn that, actually. Like, guys, I can remember, I'll tell you a story, and I don't mind, because these people have become dear friends of mine, and talk about these were I was a high school vice principal, and then I became an elementary vice principal before I became an elementary principal. But there was a bit of a transition in our school at that time, and the transition wasn't smooth for everybody. And so I sat at I never thought I'd be in elementary school leadership. I just didn't see that, and so I was asked to provide some support there. And I can remember sitting around with some amazing teachers and human beings who I did not know at the time. And I still remember I'm laughing as I say it, because it's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever said without, I never asked a question, I didn't know these people. And my opening line at the opening faculty meeting was, "Folks, we need to be better." And I know exactly that. Totally.
Way to go, school leader.
No, totally. Never say that, folks. No, I'm saying that because I get the stupidity of it, and the grace that I got. And like I said, these became some of my dear friends. Like, this is a shout out to you, Jody Baumhoff, Evelyn Bowman, like Marsha Kuznick. There is just a team of people there who had all kinds of experience. And here comes this know-it-all who doesn't really know anything about elementary school leadership, and they took me under their wings, and they helped me succeed. Like, I will always have a place in my heart for those people, for the grace that they gave. Well, when I started in leadership, I was like, I'm going to solve the problem. I don't even know what the question is, but I'm going to solve this, right?
Yeah.
And you have to learn.
That's a good way to think
and
about
you
it.
have to learn. I just had to learn by doing it. And like I said, those people helped me. They took me under their wings, and they even helped me to know what questions to ask. It made me realize, and I didn't know this before I became a leader, like this idea of, like, we're all responsible for each other's success.
Oh, yes.
It really, I can get sad, I think is the word. It's not the right word, but sad when I hear people who talk like when a colleague goes into leadership, like you're going over to the dark side, and it's like there's no dark side about it, right? It's about calling, it's about office, right? Going back to that, and it's this interdependence, right? Where it's like, man, as teachers, we have a responsibility to help the principals succeed. We really do, and as a principal, we you have a responsibility to help these teachers succeed. Like we need each other, and I didn't know that. Like that's what those teachers actually told me. Like without me saying it, they felt responsible for my success, and I just think what a beautiful posture they took with someone whose opening line was, "We need to do better." No, honestly,
that's just a picture of the body of Christ, though, too, right? We have different gifts, and we're equipped for different roles because we have different callings.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. So.
Yeah, I have one more question for you. So my kid's school is looking for a new leader actually right now. So they have an interim this year, and I just filled out a survey.
Yeah.
And one of the questions on that survey was, what do you think are some qualities that the leader, of your kid's school should have? And it was an interesting thought exercise for me to answer that question. So I'm curious.
Can you share? Can you share a couple of things?
I want to hear your answer first.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah.
So if you had to name some qualities or characteristics that you think make for a good leader, what would you say?
Totally. Depending on the context, the type of school, like if I think about for my own kids, somebody who loves Jesus and takes following in the way of Jesus really seriously and embodies that in their everyday walking around life. I want my kids to see that. I want my kids to see someone that is interested in their heart and their mind. Like I think about Jamie Smith's line, right? Like, what if education wasn't first and foremost about information, but formation?
Right.
Somebody that understands that maybe it works from the heart up to the brain instead of the brain to the heart. So somebody that understands that education for formation, which is what we've talked about. I would say somebody that doesn't ever shame kids, that even when they're having tough conversations, it's framed in the context of I want to talk to you about this because I love you and because I love this community, and there's brokenness, but it comes out of a place of love, like to say I want something better for you in your life, and if I didn't want something better for you, I wouldn't talk to you about this. But I love you too much to let this go. I think someone who thinks creatively and innovatively about education, like I want to say, hey, like these are the good things we're doing, and how can we grow and leverage those good things? But what are the things that we're doing as a school that maybe we shouldn't be doing anymore? Because I always think it's easy as a school leader, and I had an amazing model in our superintendent Dave Lowen back in Surrey. He's one of the most gifted, strongest leaders, and I actually texted him that a few weeks ago just to say, you need to know I talk about you all the time. Like he was crazy. I'm just blessed. But he would often like this idea of like, if we're gonna add something, like what are we gonna take away? And I remember him saying this idea of it's easy to add as a school leader. Everybody loves adding things. Like who does, like look at this, look at that. But it's way harder to look at a school culture and say what's kind of run its course.
Oh yeah.
And then to have the courage to make those changes. So to think innovatively, creatively around pedagogy. I want a school leader that cares for their faculty. Right? Like I think just to understand, right? Like, what does it mean to create a culture of care? Because I think if you're modeling caring for your faculty, the Lord willing, they're also then taking that model of care into their classrooms, right? Like,
if we want the kids to be thriving, we want the faculty to be thriving.
Totally. So, I mean, those are some, it's little things. It's little things like I want you to be outside on the playground, getting your hands dirty, just having be playful. Like, take yourself serious and the work serious, but make sure you play too. Make sure you laugh. Now, can you share a couple of things that? What is one thing, Abby? What is one thing for you?
A couple of years were on my list too. Christ Follower was first for me. The creative and innovative thinking about education, taking care of teachers. Trying to think what else I put down. I think that I said something about instruction. I liked the way you talked about formative,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
how, I think I talked about holistic, right? About how, about seeing the world as a whole and an instruction that reflects all of that, and being an instructional leader too.
Like, I hope you have a, you know, at your child's school, there's a principal who once in a while says, I've never thought about that before.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, wow, thank you.
Yeah.
What a great model that would be.
Yeah.
Right? Like, to be,
Yeah.
you know, like, thank you for gifting me with that.
And who can recognize that in other people and bring out those
Totally.
and let them shine in their own ways.
Yeah, and models gratitude, like even in that, right? To model gratitude for those things. So, but I do think that idea, and again, I think I don't know who I learned this from, if it was from Dave or someone else, but this idea of like, yeah, like you can have an open door policy, but what if no one ever walks through the door?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to reflect on that as a leader. And then the last thing, okay, see this now, you got me going. The last thing I learned, so I worked with one of the vice principal at one of the schools I had. His name was Danny, and he's 10 years younger than me, and I learned so much. Talk about like being open to your mentors being younger than you, or how like him mentoring me in different ways. I was a way better principal because I worked with him and watching him. He would, at the end of every day, like, and almost, and when I mean every, like I literally mean almost every day, would go like at around 3:20, 3:30, school day shorter in Canada, so about half an hour after school's done, and he would walk into every single classroom and check in on every single teacher. And sometimes it was a 2-3 minute conversation, and he would be there sometimes till 4:30, 5 o'clock, as long as there was teachers there, checking in on them, and caring for them, seeing how they're doing, listening to them, encouraging with them, like what. And he's the person who taught me the question of like, principals should ask their teachers, when you feel supported by me as a principal, what does that look like? Instead of assuming that. And I learned that from him. And so, and that goes back to someone who cares for their teachers, but cares, like, don't wait for them to walk through the door. Walk through their door.
Yeah.
Actually be in their space.
Yeah.
So
that's great advice.
So those are some of those things that come to mind.
Okay, if you could just like create that person and then send them over to my kids.
Totally,
Very
right.
nice.
Totally. So
now that we've had that job description.
Totally.
down.
So he walked on Earth about 2,000 years ago.
Hey,
so
yeah.
no, but I mean in that sense, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I say that not facetiously, actually, right? But like to live in the servant way of Jesus, right? And those things and other ways. So.
But Matt, I so appreciate that. Thanks for sharing from your passion and your expertise on this. But you model so much of what you're describing here, brother. And I'm so glad that you're speaking into the lives of these future school leaders through our school leadership program. And thank you for the work that you're doing. You're making a difference.
Thanks. It's a privilege. Just even last night sitting with those current and future leaders. It's like it's like you say, Dave, we get to do this, but that there's an element of that. Like I come home from that class on Wednesday nights, and it's like, man, like I have learned so much, and that's what it should look like in any learning community, right? If we're learning from each other. So, friends, we know that your time is valuable, and we want to thank you for joining us in the hallway today. Thank you for the good, God-delighting work that you are doing, and we hope that the Lord gives you what you stand in need of in this week. Finally, we'd like to send you into your day and week with this blessing. So to our listeners who we're so thankful for and appreciate so much, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace and give you peace and give you peace. Amen. Thanks for listening, everyone, and have a good week.
This podcast was quite literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is an independent podcast created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Thanks for listening.